I'm Nati, and thanks for coming to hear me talk today at very early o'clock on a Sunday morning, so I appreciate that, thank you. I'm going to be speaking today about how we can broaden our circle of compassion, and I'm going to explain what I mean about that, but I'm going to start first of all just by giving a little bit of background as to how it came to be that I'm here speaking to you today. And I think it's important by way of background because it's relevant to the topic that I'm speaking about. And that's about a week ago, World Vegan Day announced its speakers, and it became evident very quickly that all of the speakers speaking today were men. And that was a source of disappointment for a lot of people, and a lot of people voiced their concern about that on the World Vegan Day page on Facebook. And World Vegan Day came out and said, look, we tried to get some women to speak, but we weren't able to get any. And so I put my hand up and I said, look, I'd be happy to speak. And initially the response was, well, thanks very much, that's really great. We'll love to have you on board next year, but it's too late for this year. And then people were still quite concerned about it, and I was still quite concerned about the fact that we had the biggest day in the vegan calendar, and all of the speakers who were speaking on the day were really of one gender, and therefore, in my view, not very representative of the community. So I emailed the organisers and I said, look, I'm a bit disappointed about this. I think that this is really lacking, and I'm still willing to speak. And that was on Thursday. And so on Thursday afternoon, they came back to me and they said, we'd be happy to have you speak, which is why I'm here and also speak, which is why I have the first slide. And the reason I think that that's problematic is because what I like to think about it when I'm thinking about veganism and when I'm thinking about ethical issues is about how we can build an inclusive community, how we can build a community where people want to be a part of it, where people feel welcome, where people feel like they are represented and valued as part of that community. And so I'm speaking today about how we can, practical ways, how we can broaden our circle of compassion. Compassion, I think, is about feeling empathy for people. And when I think about a circle of compassion, I'm talking about who is it in the world that you feel empathy towards? Who is it that you feel moved to help if they're suffering? Is it, humans like you? Is it animals? Is it people like you? Is it people very different from you? Is it everybody? Is it a narrow circle? Humans as a whole have quite a narrow circle of compassion. This isn't just something I made up, it's actually quite scientific. Humans find it really difficult to connect on a personal level with a really wide group, and on that basis their circle of compassion tends to be quite narrow. What vegans do is they extend that circle of compassion, the people that they care about, to non-human animals, which I think is really, really important, and obviously what today is all about. But what I want to talk to you about today is if you think about your circle of compassion as being a spotlight, and the lighted area in the middle of the spotlight being the people that you care about, you can either include animals by shifting that spotlight across so that it includes animals and therefore excludes a bunch of people on this side that used to previously be in it. Or you can turn the knob a little bit and actually broaden the diameter of that circle and include people who were previously excluded on this side and include people who were previously excluded on this side. And when I say people, I also mean to include non-human animals. And I think that what happens particularly in animal circles, but in social justice circles a lot, is that instead of people broadening the group for whom they feel empathy and compassion, they actually just shift it from one group to another. And unintentionally, I think a lot of the time they exclude a whole lot of people that really we should be, in order to have an inclusive society, we should be including. And an example of how this happens is, for example, PETA. The PETA campaigns have long been criticised for being exclusive of feminists. And whether or not you think that PETA's tactics get the public's attention, I think it is true and undeniable that PETA has alienated a whole group of feminists in the community. And those feminists, the problem with that is that those feminists will now, if they come to extend their own circle of compassion to non-human animals, they will do that in spite of PETA's tactics, not because of it. I think that's a problem. The other example that I want to share with you about how we might be shifting rather than expanding our circle is that recently there was some news that came out, I think from the UK, about a farmer who suicided after some cruelty was uncovered. The cruelty to animals on his farm was uncovered, and he suicided. And I saw some posts on Facebook which were vegan people who were animal rights activists, who were celebrating this fact, celebrating it, even though the farmer left a family behind, left workers behind, left an entire farm behind, even though it must feel incredibly terrible, and you must be going through some really, really dire, desperate times in order to take the step of suiciding. So even though this is obviously, objectively, a tragedy, there were people who were celebrating that. And I think that this is another example of how sometimes we shift rather than broaden the circle of compassion. I think problematically for us is that as a social justice movement, I think it's really important that we actually connect with other social justice movements. And what came to my mind when I saw the news about this farmer was that there are mental health campaigners out there who would see this as a tragedy and who might look at vegans celebrating this fact and think, vegans don't care, vegans lack compassion, and therefore we've built a wall between us and mental health campaigners rather than building a bridge. I think that's really problematic. A less drastic example of how we might shift rather than expand, and why I think that's bad, is when vegans or animal campaigns campaign for the animals at the expense of other marginalised groups. Not necessarily quite as out there as PETA, but certainly in more subtle ways. So the thing that comes to mind is that AJP, during the last election, made some preference deals with some minor parties which were quite right-wing, and they preferenced those minor parties over and above other progressive, bigger parties like the Greens. And they came out and they said that they did that for the animals so that they would have a better chance at getting elected. I think that is one really great way of alienating a whole lot of social justice movements, which we really need to bring towards us, not push away. And the last example that I want to share with you is something that's actually really prevalent, really subtle, but I think even more problematic, and that is that we exclude groups. We don't necessarily work against them, but we exclude other social justice movements. We don't take active steps to include other social justice movements in our circle of compassion. And I think that can sometimes build, like I said, walls instead of bridges. And to illustrate that, I just want you to think about how many campaigns, animal campaigns, you can think of in the last year or so that had a really active feminist message. I can't really think of any. If you can think of any animal campaigns that say had a really active human rights message, or an animal campaign that had a really active environmental message, I think they're really few. Similarly, I haven't seen very many feminist campaigns that have an active animal message. I haven't seen a whole lot of queer campaigns that have an active animal message. And I think this is a failing. I think this is a failing of us to build those bridges with other social movements. So I'm now just going to tell you why I think it's really important for us to build these bridges, and that's because I think that a failure to actively engage with other social justice movements makes us less welcoming as a community. We don't live single-issue lives. We don't live our lives just for the animals. We all care about other things. And if we build a community that embraces those other things that we care about, we're going to see that more people want to be a part of that community. When we alienate other groups on the basis that they don't extend their circle of compassion to animals, then what we're doing is we're asking them to alienate us on the basis that we don't extend our circle of compassion to their particular social group. I think it also makes sense for us on a practical level to be inclusive, because if more people want to become a part of our community, then more people will be open to broadening their circle of compassion to animals. If what we want is to have more people engage with animal messages, more people think critically about how their lives impact on others, then we need to think critically about how our lives and our campaigns impact on the things that they care about. And in that way, I think we can build a community that's more inclusive, not less. I have spent the last few minutes, I don't know how long I've gone, but I've spent it talking about, I guess, the theory and some examples, but don't get me wrong, I don't think that this is a fluffy idea or a theoretical idea that we can all sit around drinking beers or having coffee and talking about and then forgetting. I actually think that we need to put it into practice on a practical level, and I think that we can put it into practice on a practical level. So I've taken the opportunity to get a bit of a list going. If you think, like me, that it's important that the animal movement moves towards a social justice bent, if you think that the animal movement needs to build these bridges, then these are some things that you can do to make sure that we're doing that. The first is be representative in your groups, in your communities, in your campaigns. Look around, make sure that you are engaging with people, that you're listening to them, that you are inviting people from different backgrounds, from different areas, with different interests to be a part of your group. Not just to be a part of your group, but to influence it and be open to that influence. I think that's how we build bridges. Be representative in the sense that if you're organising an event such as Wellbeing Day, you need to ask yourself actively, are my speakers representative of the community? Because if they're not, then people will feel excluded. Are my speakers going to be coming from different points of view? Are they covering different things that lots of different people will want to think about? Because if you have one speaker, say, speaking to the queer community will come. And then they might stick on for the second speaker. Do you see how it works? That those bridges can be built really easily if you take active steps to think about it. The second thing that I think we need to think about in our communities is to question our bias, to really be open to question, have I organised this event in a way that's biased towards my feelings? Have I included enough people in my consultation? Make sure that you are active about incorporating other groups. It doesn't just happen naturally. We tend to flock to the people that we know, tend to flock to the people that are like us. You need to be active in that inclusion. And make sure that you speak to each other about how you can be inclusive. You can turn to the person next to you and say, I've organised this thing. Do you think it's inclusive? Do you think it's representative? Have the discussion. The answer might be yes, which is great, but it's important to have the discussion. And do this simple thing. It's really silly, but do this. Look around in your groups. if you're organising an event, if you're meeting for coffee, if you're having a community group, look around. If you all look the same, chances are you're not being representative. That's all I'm saying. Just question that. The other thing that you can do that's really simple, I think, is remember your passions. Remember the things that you were concerned about before you became active in the animal movement, and continue to be active in them. You can be an animal advocate in your refugee action collective. You can be an animal advocate in your anti-homophobia campaign. You can be an animal advocate in your trans awareness campaign. And we might find that if this happens, then we might have a situation where we turn up to a refugee action collective barbecue and it's completely vegan. Wouldn't that be amazing? I would really love to see that. Similarly, I think it's really important that you become a refugee advocate in your animal groups, that you become an anti-racism advocate in your animal groups, that you become a feminist advocate in your animal groups, because that is how we're going to build bridges. You can be that bridge. You don't have to be a wall. The other thing to remember is to be humble. We all have biases. We all have concerns. We all come from different areas. You know, we're not going to be 100% right all of the time. Of course, you agree with yourself. That's why you hold your views. But be open to the fact that you could be wrong. And not only could you be wrong, you could actually improve your own views by taking into account someone else's. It's not about being wrong all the time. It's about improving and being more inclusive and being better. And the last thing that I would urge us all to do is to be accessible as a community. Be accessible in terms of who we're including, how we're communicating, where we're communicating, and how much it costs to participate. Cost and finances are a huge barrier to inclusion, and we need to think about that. If you're organising an event, think really long and hard about how we can be more inclusive and more accessible to everybody. The more people that can access our events, the more likely it is that we will learn from them, that they will learn from us, and all of a sudden we'll have one big community rather than lots of little ones. And I think I'm out of time, but I want to close with this thought, and it's a bit esoteric if you just indulge me for a second. I can imagine a world where we do live in this inclusive community. I can imagine a world where people who are queer, maybe trans, people who are migrants, people who are black, people who are white, people who are vegan, people who, you know, wear glasses, where they all just care for each other. And I think it's being a little bit idealistic, but I can imagine that world. And I think that if you can imagine that world, then you can, as an individual, live that world. You can implement that world as an individual. And if you, as an individual, can live that world, and your friends as individuals can live that world, then ultimately we will be able to share that world, and we will be able to share that world with all of the species that we share the planet with. Thanks. Oh, and just one other thing. That's really the end of my speech, but I think it's really important that we have this conversation. I think we're at a point in our social movement where animal activists really need to think about this stuff, really need to take steps to be inclusive. I am moderating a discussion night on this very topic on the 19th of November, and I have flyers somewhere in the crowd that I'd encourage you to pick up. We'll have people from different social movements coming and speaking, and they'll be speaking about why they think it's important that we build these bridges between social movements. I think that really this is the next direction that we should be taking in our advocacy, and I encourage you all to come along.